We're going to finish up lesson 9 in, I don't know if I got 45 minutes in. We'll jump over into lesson 10 probably as well today. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to go ahead and send that to Chad right now. Alright, last week we did Southern Kingdom. Oh, I need to fix this, don't I? We don't want to watch Mufasa. Last week we did Southern Kingdom Conquest. And this week we'll look at the northern, it sounded very northern when I said Northern Kingdom Conquest, as the victory here in Canaan continues to push through. It's lesson 9, Chad. If you get, I'm going to send you 10 too if we get to it. Just the way it's done, but we're still on 9. So Joshua here in chapter 11 is going to turn his attention to the northern half of Canaan. And as big of a challenge that the Southern Kingdom conquest was, and it was challenging. Northern Kingdom is probably more challenging. Biggest challenges yet. Interestingly enough, and we'll see this today. Do we? Again, this is Bible trivia, right? This is a good Bible trivia question. We'll reach back into those big, beautiful brains of your alls and see if you can pull this answer out. In the northern portion of Canaan, there is a group of people that the Israelites have been concerned with since the time of the spies. 12 of them went to spy in Canaan, 10 were bad, and 2 were good, right? We know that song. Do we know the reason why the spies were worried about this particular set of individuals?
The giants.
Okay, they were giants. Here's the trivia part of it. Do you know what the name of those people were? Pastor Rob, for $1,000 or whatever it is. All right, you can look in chapter 11, and if you will look at, let me find the specific verse. I think it's verse 21. Yes, 21. And we're going to get to this in a second. I get an opportunity to talk about giants. I'm going to spend some time talking about giants. The Anakims, right? So the Anakims were the people that the original spies were concerned with when they went into Canaan and saw the giants there. Okay, the Anakim people. They were in the mountains there, Hebron, Debir, Anab. Right? We see kind of where they were at. Goliath, we know, was also a giant. Where was Goliath from? Where?
Philistine.
Okay, and he was Goliath of what? Gad, right? Goliath of Gad. So he was a Philistine, also a Canaanite, right? Canaanite, right? This is what Philistines were. But he was from specifically the city or town or area of Gad, not Anakim. Anakim and Gad, 2 different places, which means that there were what? Multiple sets of giants. I like talking about giants. It's interesting. And we'll get to that in a second, okay? But this is why the northern kingdom of Canaan was a bigger challenge than the southern kingdom. Okay, we've been through the Southern Kingdom conquest, the 5 kings there. We didn't know much about, didn't really see much about giants in the Southern Kingdom. Could have been, sure, right, but don't really specifically kind of see much about it. Turn the eyes to the north, and there's some big old boys that are going to have to fight, right? So this is the reason why this is more of a bigger challenge for Israel, right? Now we know, not challenge for God, no challenge at all. That's not, yes, we know that, right? But you roll up against an army of regular people with your army. Feel like you got a fighting chance. You roll up against an army of giants with your regular army, and then the faith is tested. Reasonably so, naturally so. It makes total sense. All right. So that's what the 23 odd verses here, chapter 11, that we're going to get into here and look at. So first of all, we have the northern kings coming together. So we see now another coalition of armies and kings to fight against the Israelites. This coalition, even though the southern coalition understood the ability of the Israelites and is why they came together, the northern kingdom alliance would have been even more heightened in understanding because of what just took place in southern Canaan. Right? Israel owns southern Canaan now. So Jabin, right, is the king here. Verse 12, let's read the first, chapter 11, let's read the first 5 verses here. And it came to pass that when Jabin, the king of Hazor, heard that those things, that he sent to King Jobab, the king of Madon. If Jobab was the king in the south, what would his name been? Jobab, right? That's cheesy. And the king of Shimron, and to the king of Akshaph. A couple of you got it. And to the kings that were on the north of the mountains, and of the plains south of Shinneroth, and in the valley, and in the borders of Dor on the west. And to the Canaanites on the east and on the west, to the Amorite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, and the Jebusite, in the mountains, and to the Hivite under Hermon, in the land of Mizpah. Now, just at surface value here, these kingdoms, do these sound more familiar than the other ones that were in the southern? These names, they do, right? These are some of the people that the Israelites eventually do what? For the next however long. There's constantly stuff going on here, right? We don't see them fighting with Jerusalem's, right, or the Judites, right? But the Amorites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, all these ites, right? These names kind of ring more of a bell for us if you consider like just the scriptural history as you look at the Israelites. Verse 4, when they went out, they and all their hosts with them, and much people, even as the sand that is upon the sea, shore, in multitude, with horses and chariots very many. And when all these things were met together, they came and pitched together all the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. Right. So the first 5 verses here just kind of give us the idea here of this northern alliance that is taking place to set up battle or set up defenses or whatever the case may be here against the conquering Israelites, because these kings had heard obviously about the Israel's victories in the south, and this is a pretty impressive array of nations and kings and armies in a northern confederacy to oppose Israel and the army of Israel, or Joshua, and the army of Israel. This would have been a great multitude, and these would have been like not necessarily nomadic people. These would have been people that were used to fighting. That's what they did, right? Fighting was their business. All right, that's what they did, right? So the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, right? The Jebusites, the Hivites, all these people had a great multitude. And we see in verse 4, and they went out, and they and all their host with them, and much people. What is the description of the armies and people here in verse 4? Even as the sand on the sea, right? How much sand's on the sea? A lot, right? A lot. So this was a huge amount of people. And not only were there a huge amount of people, but they also had what? Horses and chariots, and those are very many. Okay, so in an era where there is no locomotion, horses and chariots have been really important, right? And we know how important horses and chariots were to warring armies. Think about the Egyptians and their horses and their chariots. That's what gave them largely their ability to conquer that they'd be conquered back several hundred years previous to this, right? Big deal. Did the Israelites have lots of horses and chariots? If you don't know this, they don't. Right? They don't. They're just, God gave locomotion on their legs. That's all they've got right now. Nothing extra with it. Okay? So we see now the great big strength of the Northern Confederacy, and just from human value looking at the Israelites, really good warriors, absolutely, have been very successful in their battles, knew how to fight, right? But this was a insurmountable task, especially compared to the Southern Kingdom conquest. Okay? And that's what we see. All of them there come together at the end of verse 5 at the waters of Merom. So this is kind of collecting there. This Northern Confederacy is collecting there at Merom. And they are there for what reason, verse 5 says? Fight. Right? Fight. We saw the Gibeons a couple of weeks ago. They didn't want to fight. They wanted to join. We saw the southern kingdoms join to fight, but they were also pretty defensive. This was kind of more of a defensive, more passive attack on the Israelites. But in the northern kingdom, these old boys showed up to fight. They're going to take the battle to Israel. Okay. And you remember, the southern kingdom, Israel took the battle to them, right? They had to go across the mountains and do all that stuff. Northern kingdom's not that way. They're there, have showed up, mobile, striking force, far superior, most fearsome alliance that ever faced, and probably most crucial battle was at hand. Starting here in the first 5 verses. Okay, verse 6. And the Lord said to Joshua, Be not afraid because of them. For tomorrow, at about this time, will I deliver them up all slain before Israel. And thou shalt hew their horses and burn their chariots with fire. Verse 7, So when Joshua and all the people of war with him against them by the waters of Merom suddenly, and they fell upon them, verse 8, and the Lord delivered them to the hand of Israel, who smote them and chased them into great Sidon and unto Misrephothmaim, and unto the valley of Mizpah, eastward, until they smote them until they left them none remaining. And Joshua did unto them as the Lord bade him, and hewed their horses and burnt their chariots with fire. So Joshua here does not wait at Gilgal, right? So Gilgal, home base, right? We talked about that. So they go back, resupply, people are at, women and children, all that stuff. Gilgal's home base. Joshua does not wait for for Jabin's confederacy to plan and come and attack, right? The Lord tells Joshua, gives him clear, concise, direct directions and instructions on what was needed for the Israelites to conquer this northern confederacy, and promised Joshua a very clear success, straightforward victory. So Joshua goes on the counter, essentially, and launches a surprise attack and followed through on the Lord's battle plan in verses 6, 7, 8, 9, right? Verse 6, the Lord told Joshua, go attack. And then we see Joshua, no hesitation, going and attacking. Now, the only special instruction here, right, for this one, other than God saying, hey, go do it, I'll make sure it's taken care of, they'll fall down before you. God gives some special instructions for this one, right? And what were the special instructions here? Verses 8, I think, maybe 7. Chariots and horses. No more, right? Got to get rid of them. Get rid of all the chariots and the horses. Okay? Go to Psalms chapter 20. And look at verse number 7. Psalms 20, verse number 7. Let's read verse 6 too, just for a little context here. Psalm of David. See that there, chief musician there, Psalm 20. Now that I know the Lord saveth his anointed, he will hear him from his holy heaven with the saving strength of his right hand. Verse 7 says what? Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we remember the name of the Lord our God. What do you think the reasoning here? God told Joshua and the Israelites to get rid of the keep wanting to call them chariots. The chariots and the horses. That's the reason. All right, exactly, right? Trusting in the Lord, right? Now, from a military mindset, what would it have made sense for the Israelites to do to the horses and the chariots? Absolutely. Makes most sense. It's going to help them move around, make them a little more superior against the other enemies. Okay, but God doesn't want them to have anything that they would rely on, right? The Egyptians thought that their horses and chariots were really important too, and they were. And then what happened to them? They're sealed in the bottom of the Red Sea. That's where they're at, right? They all come crashing down around them, so they're literally still there, right? All of these armies as well had these horses and these chariots. It was what made them so powerful, made them more powerful than all the other nations. And they were coming to set up against God. And God wanted to make sure, right, that the tremendous military advantage that, yes, this would have afforded them, God wanted Israel to continue to trust in Him for victory rather than any type of advantage that they would have. Now, interesting question here. What would Israel's enemies think when they found out that they destroyed the horses and the chariots instead of keeping them? Yes. True.
I think they don't do.
This is crazy, absolutely. But also, sometimes crazy means, right? I told Dad's story here. Told Moxie this week, right? We're getting ready to go to kindergarten in the fall. She's not happy about it. So it's been a process. We're trying to get her more, just a little bit more, more fired up about it. And we got to talking about school yesterday. I don't remember why we were off with things. And of course, we got Pippa, just a little chatterbox, just knows everything and just thinks that she's just, most important person in all of this stuff. So she has lots to say. We have to tell her to shut up a lot. So Moxie she's telling, all the things that could, all the stuff, and sometimes people may be mean, and it's good to tell teacher somebody's mean, all this kind of stuff, right? And Haley and I have different just viewpoints on certain things, and that's really good, right? That's what makes us a team, makes us work so well together. And we got, Moxie wanted to know what you do, what somebody's mean to you. Like, Haley was telling a story when she was in primary school, some boy who liked her, knocked her down and was being mean to her, right? And then there was a whole thing, and Moxie, what do we do if somebody's being mean to you, and all this stuff, to the teacher. And I told Moxie, I was like, Moxie, now if somebody tries to be mean to you and is being ugly to you, or tries to hit you or hurt you, like my dad never wants you to get in a fight. But if sometimes you got to defend yourself, and it's okay to defend yourself. And I said, matter of fact, Moxie, sometimes you just act a little crazy, keep people off guard a little bit, keep your friends off guard a little bit. They'll be worried about you, and those mean boys won't want to do anything to you, right? Kind of just, sometimes it's good to be the kid that's a little bit, not sure about. Which is exactly what the Israelites are doing here. It makes no sense to kill the horses and get rid of the chariots. Those guys must be crazy. We don't know. What in the world are they thinking? Let's kind of keep everybody off balance and unsure of what may go on. And it also shows that how powerful it was, the God that they were serving, right? Now, do these Jebusites and Hittites and the Amorites and all the Canaanites, the heathenites, as I like to refer to them as, do they have gods that they serve? Oh, yeah. right? And like, are they devoutly serve? Just from history, do they devoutly serve those gods? Yes, it is a huge, integral part of their culture, right? And they think that their gods give them this ability, right? They think that they sacrifice stuff the right way and worship and go through the systems the right way and do all these things that the religion tells them to do, that they will then get success from whatever god they are serving. And it is deeply ingrained into their culture, into how they raise their kids and everything about it, right? And then along comes the Israelites, who also have a god that they serve very devoutly most of the time, right? But is intricately involved in the way in which their culture works, which way they raise their kids as well. And then they see their God doing crazy things like throwing hailstones and then getting rid of all of the military superiority for the Israelites, and they're still winning battles. It shows that he doesn't need these implements of war. He's more powerful than all of those things. God did not want the Israelites to have these horses and chariots because that would be a temptation, right? Absolutely. It would be a temptation for them to trust in their own strength, to trust in their own abilities if they accumulated all of these things. Now, later on in Israel's history in Isaiah, if you will flip over to Isaiah, to chapter 31, Isaiah pronounces a woe. Of course, you know, Isaiah is famous for his woes, right? He pronounces a woe on those who look to military strength, specifically horses and chariots, instead of God. Isaiah chapter 31. Got a couple verses I want you to look at. There's the first three of Isaiah 31, and we actually see this being something that's being brought up again. Isaiah 31, first three verses here. Woe to them that go down to Egypt for help, and stay on horses, and trust in chariots, because they are many, and in horsemen, because they are very strong. But they look not unto the Holy One of Israel, neither seek the Lord. Yet he also is wise, and will bring back evil, not bring it back, but will bring evil, and will not call back his words, but will arise against the house of the evildoers, against the help of them that worketh iniquity. Now the Egyptians are men, and not God, and their horses flesh, and not spirit. When the Lord shall stretch out his hands, both he that helpeth shall fall, and he that is helped shall fall down, and they shall fail together. What's going to happen to those who trust in chariots instead of God? Isaiah says they're going to what? Perish, die, death. Why do you think? This is multiple times in the Old Testament now, right? With three very specific instances that the horses and the poor horses, right? I mean, they didn't do anything. Right? That the horses and the chariots now have been essentially used in a way to show God's superiority. Why do you think specifically we're seeing these things in the Old Testament so many times? The multiplicity of this. What's the reason behind this?
It was man's wisdom to, build a chariot and put a monkey.
Okay, exactly, right? And
self-reliance.
That's the self-reliance. That was kind of where I was looking for, right? It shows self-reliance. Are horses and chariots very useful? Yes, absolutely, right? 100%. We understand just the reason why God wanted to make sure that this thing, right, this ability, this technology, however you want to consider it, very important that God wanted the Israelites to see specifically that there was nothing that man could do that would be greater than what God could do. Okay, that's the reason, and that's why we see specific times this kind of popping up. Now, there was a king in Israel that collected a huge number of horses and chariots. Do you know which king that was? Solomon, right? It was Solomon. And he literally was in violation of God's instructions for a king by doing this. In Deuteronomy, we won't flip over there, but Deuteronomy, we got time, let's do it. Deuteronomy chapter 17. in verse 14. Deuteronomy 17 down to verse 14. Excuse me. Yeah, chapter 17 down to verse 14. I'm going to read to verse 17. When thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, which land is that? That's Canaan. So we're seeing that happen now. Deuteronomy is known as what? One of the books of the what? Loudly, please, Pastor Rob. Book of law, right? So this is a law here that God is laying out for the Israelites as they are wandering around. God, Moses is writing the law down. Now we're actually seeing this come to fruition in Canaan. So the law says this: when thou art come to the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee to possess it, shalt dwell therein, and shalt say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me. Man, it's really interesting right there. Right? This is a really interesting piece of information that is kind of tucked away here in Deuteronomy. Because we know that once the kingdom has been conquered, Canaan has been conquered, and the Israelites get upset, and what do they start asking for, unrighteously asking for? A king. Right? And we see that, and this is, Deuteronomy was written several, I don't know the exact time frame, but decades before this took place. I mean, hundreds of years. I don't know the exact time frame, right? But God has tucked in verse 14 of chapter 17. That's, when thou shalt say, dwell therein, and shalt say, I will set a king over me, like all of the nations that are about me. What is the Israelites the whole time here? What has God been trying to explain to them? That they are not what? They are not like the other nations. And now we see the Israelites eventually wanting to be just like the other nations and want a king, when in reality, who should have been their king? God, all right? God knew this was going to happen and stuck it in the law well before any of these things were even thought about taking place. It's kind of wild to think about, right? That he was able to do that. All right? Of course, God can do anything, right? But this is one of those moments in Scripture you're like, huh! God is sovereign. He knew all along and planned it all along. Verse 15. That shall in any wise set him king over me, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. One from among thy brethren shalt thou set king over thee, and thou mayest not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother's, right? But he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, to the end that he should multiply horses. For as much as the Lord hath said unto him, ye shall henceforth return no more that way. Neither shall he multiply wives to himself, and his heart turn not away. Neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. So there's the law that says what the king should not do. Solomon eventually does the exact thing that he was not supposed to do, the third king in Israel, and accumulates a large number and violates the instructions because of it. Now, not surprisingly, his heart eventually, we know, turns from God. I don't have time for that. That's in 1 Kings chapter 10 and 11. We kind of see that take place. Back to Joshua. Joshua continued the campaign in the north here by attacking Hazor, which would be the largest city in Canaan, verse number 10. So, verse 9, we see him getting rid of the horses and chariots, just like he said God told him to. Verse 10. And Joshua at that time turned back and took Hazor and smote the king thereof with the sword. For Hazor before time was the head of all those kingdoms. So Hazor is the biggest one. It has now fallen into the hands of the Israelites. And they smote all the souls that were therein with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them. There was not any left to breathe. And then they burnt Hazor with fire. And all the cities of those kings and all the kings of them did Joshua take and smote them with the edge of the sword, and he utterly destroyed them, as Moses the servant of the Lord commanded. But as for the cities that stood still in their strength, Israel burned none of them, save Hazor only, that did Joshua burn. Right? So Joshua continues the campaign north into Hazor, largest city. He killed its king, killed the inhabitants of it, and burnt the city to the ground. Hazor, we see specifically, was the only city that Joshua burned. reason. Why just that one? Now, got a few reasons, right? Hazor was the not central is not the right word. It was the main hub because it stood on a prominent trade route through Canaan. So it was that's one of the reasons why it got so large. Kind of the main way through things. So we burned the trade city, main trade commerce city to the ground. Maybe, right, reasons why they did this and not the others, right? Traders now can easily see that Israel had not just won, but won a very decisive victory, and then spared the other cities maybe for later use, right? Verse 14, right, we saw that in all the spoils of these cities and the cattle the children of Israel took for a prey unto themselves, but every man they smote with the edge of the sword until they had destroyed them, neither left they any to breathe. So we see that they left the cities standing and the things in the cities, but they did not leave any of the people standing, right? They smote all of the inhabitants of the cities, took the cattle for a prey unto themselves, right? Verse 15, and as the Lord commanded Moses his servant, so did Moses command Joshua, and so did Joshua, left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Joshua. So what is the verdict here on Joshua's leading through the northern kingdoms? Has he been good or bad? Let's put it simply. He's been good, right? He has followed the orders. He has been obedient and fully obeyed the Lord's instructions here. Okay? Last part of this, go ahead, Chad, is the rest of, I guess we'll see, the victory in all of Canaan. And that's what the rest of chapter 11 summarizes, is the rest of these battles here in Canaan. So we're going to read through these as we kind of go through here. And what this does is that Joshua effectively has driven a dagger through the heart of Canaan. He's divided the south from the north. He has then claimed both north and south for Israel's possession. Now this conquest lasted for a while. Like, this wasn't just something that happened like in a week's time. Like, this took some time to accomplish. But as we see in verse 18, the gods, little g gods of the Canaanites, were no match for Israel's singular one capitalized big G God, right? Verse 16. So Joshua took all the land and the hills, all the south country, and all the land of Goshen, the valley and the plain, the mountains of Israel, and the valley of the same. And even from the Mount Halak that goes up to Seir, even unto Baalgad and valley of Lebanon under Mount Hermon. And all their kings he took, and smote them, and slew them. And Joshua made a war a long time with all those kings. Verse 19, there was not a city that made peace with the children of Israel, save the Hivites, who were the inhabitants of Gibeon. All the others they took in battle. For it was of the Lord to harden their hearts that they should come against Israel in battle, that he might destroy them utterly, and that they might have no favor, but that he might destroy them as the Lord commanded Moses. Right. So in a sense here, the kings of Canaan compelled to fight against Israel? Go verse 20. What does it say? What did the Lord do? So were the kings compelled? Ooh, interesting question.
Of themselves, maybe not, but the Lord put it in their hearts to be.
Okay, so let's read verse 20 again. Right? For it was the Lord to harden their hearts. What does it say? So what does that mean? Let's get a collective agreement here. What does that mean?
They eventually wanted to.
Why?
Because he made them.
Yes, right? God put this desire, right? Were the desires of the kings to protect their land, people, resources, that whatever, would those things eventually have taken over anyways as Israel was conquesting through Canaan? Yes. It's natural, right? Absolutely. We don't want somebody to come in here and take our stuff. But God had hardened their hearts specifically against the Israelites. Right now, think about this for a second. The Amorites, the Jebusites, the Hivites, not the Hivites, but the Amorite, whoever else, right? Were they living amongst each other kind of somewhat peacefully? Yes, they were. We know that because they formed an alliance. So were there some fighting and skirmishing going on? Sure. Every nation has that. But when it shows up and the Israelites come, we see all these guys getting together to attack the Israelites because God had hardened their hearts to want to try to destroy Joshua and God's people. Right, verse 21. And that time came, Joshua cut off the Anakim. Now, we've already talked about this a little bit, but I got 7 minutes. I'm going to talk about some giants. Okay? The Anakims are the ones specifically here that the Israelite spies, that the original spies feared, and because actually told Moses that we shouldn't go because the people were so big, right? We won't flip to those verses, but we know that story very well. The plain account of Joshua's victory that we see here in verses 21 and 22, let's go on and read them, and it says here that the cut the Anakim from the mountains, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the mountains of Judah, and from all the mountains of Israel. Joshua did what to them? Destroyed them utterly, right? So we have armies and peoples of giants, right? And we have a correlation of what a giant looks like, and we can go right to Goliath and we know, right? There's a lot of variation sometimes in what they say about how tall he was, but for most common references, we know that Goliath was how tall? 9 foot. Yeah, 9'6", right around in that area. Okay, so 9 foot tall. That's big, right? That's huge. Shaq's 7'1". He's 2 feet taller than Shaq. That's just to kind of give some reference there, right? And then we can imagine what everything else looked like as well. Okay, and that was the reason the Israelites were scared the first time. And if there's one giant, there's probably what? There's probably more than one of them, right? There's multitude. We actually know that there's multitude of giants. Or not multitude is not a good word, but many, more than one, right? There's families, bloodlines of giants. Giants produce giants. Makes sense. Ducks make ducks, cats make cats, giants make giants. So there would have been more giants around, okay? And it's crazy to think of that now that they're so concerned with these giants so many years ago that now Joshua and these old Israelites, that the Israelites make more, they haven't changed any. They show up to the Anakim people in the mountain of Hebron where there are giants, and they completely and entirely, utterly destroy them and their giant cities. Verse 21, with their cities. Does a giant live in a normal house? No, can't. Was in a giant house, has giant plates and giant seats, all that stuff has been destroyed now because the Israelites this time listened and did what God asked them to do. There were none, verse 22, of the Anakim left in the land of the children of Israel. Only in Gaza, that sounds familiar, in Gath, and in Ashdod there remain. Were there still giants in the land after the Anakim giants were killed? Yes, there were. And they will famously show up again when a little boy with a sling sees one, and then decades down the road when David is on another conquest, right, and he has to kill Goliath's brothers. And we eventually see the giants going away, okay? Did God make the giants?
Yes.
Yes. Maybe. I'm just kidding. Yes, right. I have some ideas that maybe I've got some ideas that maybe he didn't. That's a combination for a different story. Okay. So The thing about this is, right, so verse 23, so Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord said unto Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance unto Israel, according to their divisions by their tribes, and the land finally now, at the verse in chapter 11, we see the land is resting from war. So the final analysis, the battle was in fact the Lord's. He prevails. Joshua accomplishes everything that God had intended him to accomplish, though there was still land to conquer even after Joshua was off the scene. Go ahead, Chad, bring up that last slide. God accomplishes his work in this world through his people. That means he wants us to step up by faith and serve him with our best efforts. As we do, he accomplishes his will through us. God faithfully works through his people, right? And lesson here as I finish up, right? And this is said this a lot up here, but it needs to be repeated as much as possible. God has given us the tools. He's given us the ability. He's given us the time, help, so on. He's given us all the things. What is our requirement? To do. Be faithful, right? The requirement for us is to simply just be willing to do whatever it is that God wants us to do. He's given us everything else. We simply just have to say, okay, and go, right? And do. And that's a whole list, whatever it may be, right? Every one of us has a different job that God has us, he works through us faithfully in different ways to accomplish his will. All the requirement is for us is to simply say, here I am, Lord, I'll send me. I'll do whatever. Joshua just took over a whole bunch of places and conquered things and killed things and all the stuff that he happened and all Joshua did, right? When Joshua was doing things the right way, he simply just said, yes, Lord, and then did what God asked him to do. God provided everything else. It's the exact same thing for us as Christians today. Same God, same serving, same abilities that God had then, he has right now. All he simply needs for us to do is just shut our mouths and say yes. And then he will take care of the rest. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this lesson, for this time, for this ability to see the conquering here of chapter 11, of how you worked through the Israelites and through Joshua as well, and used him in such a mighty way. And we pray, Lord, as we have next hour here, as Pastor Rob comes, keep us attentive to the word for us this morning as well. In your name I pray. Amen.